All right, Mr. Fleming and Mr. Nesi are here. Let's dig in.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you at part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
You know, we're all really smart the day after the primary. I knew it. Yeah, I knew that. I knew. Yeah. I can't tell you how smart I am every day after an election result. It's amazing. How are you? Good to have you in. It's time to review what we all, or some of us, a percentage of us, did yesterday, which was to vote. Let's just dig in on this Thursday after the primary and put up a headline, which I think is, you know, even the headline this morning said to me that the press, the Journal at least, has this consciousness that this is a two-person race. I don't necessarily see it as Ali Frazier 2. But for Rhode Island politics, it very well may be. There is a third candidate in the race, of course, who now looms after Gina Raimondo wins the Democratic primary handily, and Alan Fung wins the Republican primary handily. Here are the three main voices in the general election race.
Rhode Islanders have enough with Governor Raimondo and throughout the state, where no matter where I've gone into people's backyards, they said the governor's got to go.
We got a real race ahead of us. The people of Rhode Island have said, do more, go faster, and keep going. So that's what we're going to do.
I think I'm going against two flawed candidates, and I'm the only businessman that's really in this race. Lifelong businessman.
Well, that's them three, and here are the two guys I rely on amongst a small handful of others to be able to talk smart about this stuff. By the way, I was watching the TV last night, and he's trying to be me. He's like shirt sleeve now, working man behind the table, working the numbers. You're the analyst with the jacket and the tie on. At least he threw a jacket on, for crying out loud.
We're traveling now.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, exactly. We're doing the circuit.
Great coverage last night. You know, people talk about the primaries as being, you know, non-events in some way. I mean, what other event do 150, 160,000 people do the same thing in Rhode Island on one single day? Nowhere. I mean, so it's a significant occurrence.
And there are fewer and fewer things that bring people together across class, across race, across gender, across, you know, communities.
Yep.
You know, and voting. I mean, only about 1 in 5 registered voters came to the polls yesterday, which actually isn't bad for a primary, but still a lot of people not taking part. But I think that's a good point, Dan, that it's still something that a lot of people participate in.
All right, gut check on give me your overall come away.
Well, it's funny. You said, you know, we all. I said I've become even more humble. I hope I've always had some humility since 2016. I did not see the governor's margin of victory coming. I thought, I tended to think she would be okay against Matt Brown based on the resources gap, based on her longer history in the party, endorsements, but a 25, 26, 27 point margin of victory, much bigger than I thought.
Yeah, throw the number up, Jess, if you get a chance there, and we'll take a look at actually one of the more impressive numbers is Spencer Dickinson grabbing 9% of the vote. And he spent a little money there and got some face time and some air time, no doubt. But you know, Joe, these races these days can't be won with no dough. And Matt Brown, you know, brought a butter knife to a gunfight.
Yeah. And the thing is, he got about 39,000 votes. A lot of those are people that whoever was there would get those votes. They're union people who would never vote for Gina, some strong progressives that really, you know, didn't like Gina. And those are votes you get automatically. You need money to get the rest of the votes, and that's what he was lacking. Yeah. He had no paid media in the sense of TV to let people know who he is. They don't remember him when he was Secretary of State. You have to reintroduce yourself to the voters.
Well, in a two-person race, I say that most candidates, it's kind of like the SAT test. You know, you get 200 points for putting your name down. Yep. Most candidates get that 30%-ish, 25, 30%, just to be able to start. Well, so he really didn't gain much from that kind of start base. Dickinson pulled away some anti-Gina vote from him, right? But he's going to have to come face to face with the idea that that was a really ineffective attempt.
And he got in the race really late, which I think is also a thing. You can't raise money if you get in the race in June. You have to get in the race a year out to start raising that money.
He also didn't set Brown didn't set the table with, the thing I watch for, the dog that didn't bark was union endorsements. You know, we know there are public sector unions that are not, there's no love lost for Gina Raimondo with them. Teachers unions are the prime example, but there are others. None of them endorsed Matt Brown for governor. They didn't endorse the governor either because they don't like her, but he could not prove to them it was worth souring their relationship with the incumbent Democratic governor, and that he could win, especially when they also had a hard fight in their hands. They were all in for Aaron Regenberg.
Well, and then the Sanders thing. I mean, the Sanders thing is kind of like the trademark branding of a progressive, viable candidate, right? He couldn't get Bernie Sanders' endorsement on the governor's side. Regenberg got Sanders' endorsement on the lieutenant governor race. So, you always had this. The whole time I was left wanting by Matt Brown. But I agree. I was in that. People are asking me. I was in that 6 to 8% category. That she would win by 6 to 8.
I thought 10 points would have been I would have said, that's quite a good night for the governor.
So what happened?
I think she had a really good ground game. They really worked on identifying their voters. They talked about it to people that we got a good base of voters that we know who they are. We're going to get them out on primary day. And I think they did that.
And I also think, Joe's last poll for WPRI and Roger Williams, Gina Raimondo's numbers with Democrats were strong. I think she had a 76% approval rating with Democrats. And I think Joe has taught me this. I want to say primaries we think are usually like 80% Democrat, 20% independents. So if 80% of the voters are 3/4 favorable toward you, Matt Brown, he talked like there was a massive groundswell of opposition to Gina Raimondo, but sometimes I think people can mistake the intensity of those who don't like a candidate for the number of people who don't like the candidate, and it's not the same. Everyone just has one vote.
Squeaky wheels, maybe not enough of them, right?
Yeah.
We'll talk about the differences between the governor and lieutenant governor races on the Democratic side when we talk about the lieutenant governor's race, because, and I want to just a quick snippet on that. Aaron Regenberg spent a few $100,000 more than Demeke. Think about the money spent in lieutenant governor's race and the kind of money not spent in the governor's race. While we're all talking about how Matt Brown might be able to pull something off, guess what? Money talks in these things. There's no doubt about that. On the Republican side, another one, people were asking me on the radio and on the street, any upsets? I said, if there's going to be one, it would be on the Republican side, I thought. But, to Fung's credit, he was able to swing a 14-point win. Your gut on that is what?
I would have been very surprised if Patty Morgan won, because Alan Fung is able to draw big blocks of vote out of the city of Cranston. 4 years ago, 82%.
Wild numbers,
3,000 votes. 4 years ago, he got 75% and won by 2,000. So he increased the turnout in Cranston, increased his margin of victory. And when you come out of Cranston by 3,000 votes, it's very difficult to beat him. And Patty Morgan came from a small community, West Warwick. She did well there in Coventry. But there's only small numbers there.
And in fairness to Fung, he won outside of Cranston too. It was slimmer because Cranston he gets such a big margin out of Cranston. But he was better again in both cases. The primary voters knew Gina Raimondo and Alan Fung better than the other candidates. They had more money. They ran more better resourced campaigns. And I think in the end, it's sort of the obvious people won.
And Republican primary is not TV. It's not even radio. It's direct voter contact, because you're talking 30,000 voters. You direct mail, you can personally call them, because it's so few voters. 15,000, 16,000 to win those primaries.
That said, I do think
I take complete umbrage and insult over the idea that it's not TV or radio. Well, I mean, I don't know how the hell you pay your mortgage, Joe, but that's just not an acceptable analysis.
It's not the key
but I
thing
get your point. It is such
a small universe.
You came here on multiple times, Ted too, and talked about 30,000-ish. I mean, it's on the number. Boom. And that's why I have to laugh out loud at Giovanni Feroci, who had the unmitigated gall to come in here and talk to us about how he's going to voter ID 15 to 18,000 votes and grabbed, what, 1,800 or whatever the hell. Oh, can we put those numbers up? I don't know if we've done that already. On the Republican side for governor, we didn't post those? No. Oh, I thought we posted those. Anyway, it was negligible.
I think he had 1,000 votes?
1,000 votes, roughly.
Maybe? Yeah, Giovanni Feroci?
Like what? Stop it.
I think Giovanni.
And shame on us for paying too much attention to him. Right?
Yeah, there's a lot of attention paid for somebody who drew 1,000 votes.
But it's tough. On the other hand, I had people early on saying to me, "Well, why are you giving Matt Brown attention? He has been in the state for a long time, etc." I would just say it can be tough to judge at least initially, late in the primary, Giovanni Ferrosi had no money. It really did not appear he was running a robust campaign. I would agree with you on that, Dan. But earlier on, sometimes primary voters go in unusual ways. So
let me ask you this: Patricia Morgan, I thought gave it a real college try. There's no doubt about that. Does her endorsement matter here? She's holding it out for. I mean, there's a lot of animus right now inside the phone booth. You know, the Republican Party. If she turns and says, "I'm with Trillo," what happens here? Is it transferable?
Well, it's always how many people. It's the old. What did Stalin say? How many divisions does the Pope have? You know, if he says something against them, like he does. How many people does she bring to war with her if she wants to oppose Alan Fung? You know, are her voters actually going to vote for Joe Trillo if she says to? Are they listening to Patty Morgan for a signal in the fall, or will it be seen as, you know, sour grapes? We saw this last time. You know, Ken Block at first was resistant to endorsing Alan Fung after the 2014 primary. I believe he came around fairly quickly.
He did.
But the bottom line is, every vote, even if it's only a few that goes to Joe Trillo, if she endorses him, is one less vote Alan Fung gets, because they're definitely not going to vote for the governor. So everything Trillo picks up really hurts Alan Fung.
You don't believe? You know, we're going to break. We're going to go back and we'll talk a little bit about the Trillo factor, if in fact it is a factor at all, and that lieutenant governor's race, which was really the undercard but highlight of the evening. Stay with us. All right, so some of the scenes last night, obviously Governor Raimondo, Mayor Fung, and there's Joe Trillo, who says he can get into this race. This is an interesting thing. I hope we don't repeat what happened in the Republican primary in the general with Joe Trillo vis-a-vis Giovanni Ferrosi. Meaning, you know, we spent a lot of time looking at Trillo and wondering if he's going to explode a la, God rest his soul, Bob Healy. You have a theory on this, Joe, about how this does or does not work.
I think Trillo and Healy are two different animals altogether. Due to the fact with Bob Healy in 2014, you had a lot of those votes that Matt Brown got, I believe, a lot of Democrats who said, I cannot vote for the governor because of the pension issue, but I do not want to vote for a Republican. We know Bob Healy has run for a lot of times. He's a different type of person. We're going to throw him our vote. Well, with Joe Trillo, those same people, I don't think they're going to go to Joe Trillo because he doesn't come across as someone who might support union issues. He's going to be more against the union type issues. They see him as a Republican. So now they have to make a decision whether they go with Alan Fung or they go with the governor or some other independent running.
Unless Trillo makes a run at conservative Democrats who might have, maybe somehow could have ended up in Raimondo's corner. Of course, I agree that
he
Trillo
absolutely believes that he can grab a quotient of that Democratic, Mattiello-ish, conservative Democrat who's holding on against progressives.
But this goes back to one thing you said earlier, Dan. I totally agree. He needs to have the money. Right now, he has not have a lot of money in the campaign. He has to put money in. Here, he needs the TV. He needs the radio. He has to identify who he is.
Not only for the long haul, but even to qualify for the Channel 12 debate. Now, that's a corporate thing. That's not something that you. But do we know what the parameters are for a candidate to qualify?
Yeah, they're on our website. There's a series. They need. You know, I won't go through it all here. They need a campaign headquarters. They need to have a certain level of fundraising. They need to have a staff. They need to, I believe, reach 10% in the polls, which I think could be the #1 question for Joe Trillo.
Whose polls? Your polls? You're going to poll the race, right, for Channel 12?
Well, Channel 12, Roger Williams University, we're doing polling.
Yep.
I mean, literally, that poll is going to be like a preliminary election for Joe Trillo, because if he can't get on the television stage, not that the TV debates are the beginning and the end of these things, but in the general, they matter. The ratings are always significant, and the coverage is as significant. Right. If he can't end up on stage, he can't get there from
here. And look, I'll say, different outlets have different, you know, we, as you said, our parent company sets the parameters for the debates that Channel 12 does, so we'll follow what our corporate parent has decided. Other stations may do it locally and may make a different decision or have a different set of rules. Yeah. So I don't think it's
I'm
all
certain
or nothing,
he'll make a WPO radio debate. I mean, I think that's more of a gut feel than anything else. He's had such a presence on the radio for such a long time as a 16-year state rep. But your theory is really interesting. The Healy fascination could have grabbed a disgruntled progressive voter. But Trillo is not in that category.
No, Trillo, I don't see Trillo as a person.
So the
who gets those
progressives
votes.
end up sitting out of general?
Well,
Do they just get disgusted?
I don't know. I had one tweet, very anecdotal, but I will say I had someone tweet at me this morning. You know, Matt Brown ran a great race, and Governor Raimondo ran a disgusting smear campaign against him. But I will vote for her this fall because I can't let a Republican in because I'm mad about Trump and everything else. So, you know, I think part of what could help Raimondo is the national climate is so partisan right now. You have people. I had people yesterday talk. I talked to a lot of voters at the polls who said to me, "Oh, I voted for the governor." You know, they were not super enthused, but in the end decided they liked her better and didn't know enough about Matt Brown. But they wanted to pivot right to discussing their dislike for the president. These were Democratic primary voters, but still, that's what they were passionate about.
And Trillo is the coach, is the chair of Trump,
Right.
and Fung is going to run from Trump
Right.
like he's the float.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. But the governor's going to still try to tie Trump and Fung together. There's no question.
Yeah.
Well, and Trump's not going to do down ballot candidates fair. Today you have his tweet about Puerto Rico that's been driving the news cycle this morning.
Right.
You know, they have a very competitive governor's race in Florida, where there's a lot of people who've come from Puerto Rico who are not going to be happy about that. And those kind of comments are a wild card that Republican candidates haven't faced in the past, that the president's going to switch the whole news cycle.
I don't know if you ever odds make on these things. You poll take, but you odds make?
No, I don't do the odds.
No, but I really have to think if, I'm a big horse guy, right? So if I looked up on the board, I'd have to see Raimondo was kind of a 3 to 5 shot, like that, and Fung would be sitting there at like a 4 to 1 shot. Trillo would be an 18 to 1 shot.
Last
that
night,
kind of a
because
thing.
of the size of her victory,
Yeah.
I think a lot more people on the stage today believe she's in a lot better position. I think they're surprised on how strong she did last night, that she has more support than
I think
people
her
actually
team
thought.
is surprised
Yeah.
how strong she did last night.
Right? And maybe everyone just needs to take a deep breath and really get a grip on how ineffective the Brown campaign actually was. His persona far exceeded the campaign execution.
Yeah, and there was a lot of buzz around Matt Brown from people who, frankly, I don't know if they would have voted for Matt Brown if he'd won, but it was more he was a stick to beat the governor with. Those people weren't necessarily looking to cast a ballot for him and make him governor.
Going back to what you said about the progressives, I believe, will go with the governor. There's no question about that. It's the retired union people. Will they go with the governor, or will they just not vote for the governor? That's what may happen this time.
All right, the LG race was, that's the second time I promoted it, but I'll tell you, it was a late night. Be right back.
I believe that the best politics is when you bring people together to solve problems. And so, to have the mayors here with me today, I am so proud to be working on behalf of all the municipalities, because what I've said, there's 39 cities and towns, each and every one's important.
So that's Dan McKee, the incumbent lieutenant governor, who wins the primary, and unless the sky falls, win in the general election, based on the not too formidable Republican and moderate and independent candidates. This was a barn burner. I spent a goodly amount of time at his vote counting spot in Pawtucket last night. That video is preliminary to the results that came in, but it separated at the end for about 2,400 vote. Total. He was ripping over the robocalls in the last 24 hours that said he was pro-life, not pro-choice. Reaganberg not only doubled his money, spent, think about this. This guy right here spent $500,000, more than Matt Brown, who ran for governor. He's an upstart. He's got maybe an impressive future, but I'll tell you, that was a dirty, dirty campaign, and some assertions that I thought were just, the soullessness of politics in general is unnerving to me in terms of the representations that are made. Do you have any thought on that?
Well, I think it was the progressives versus the moderate and conservatives of the Democrat. It was that simple, and the progressives.
Yeah, but anything seems to go.
Well,
anything, make any assertion you want to.
Yeah, especially in Democratic primaries, you do get that. I mean, is it right? Obviously not. But you will see that.
What's the nature of them that they're like that, so dirty?
I think they believe they can get more votes that way. And if it's going to move voters and get them into their column, they're going to go with it.
You're not saying anything.
I don't know that it was dirtier. I've covered a lot of campaigns at this point.
Well, the misrepresentation of facts. I mean, how can you send a robocall and say the guy's pro-life?
I didn't hear the robocall, so I don't know.
He's pro-choice.
Yeah,
He's always been pro-choice.
He was endorsed by Right to Life the night before.
That's right.
Sort of. I mean,
well, you know what? The Right to Life, the Right to Life group in this state are clowns. They have no principle and no philosophy. They feel like they have. It's like they want to be involved, and no one's on. And no one. Well, some Morgan.
Well, my
Morgan,
point just being, there was a blast from Right to Life therefore endorsing Dan McKee, saying vote for Dan McKee tomorrow in the Democratic primary. And I agree. Dan McKee is pro-choice. He's always said that. But Right to Life didn't help him. Maybe they would have been better off.
On the Board of Elections, independent expenditures, there was a Right to Life thing, and it said the people they're supporting. One of them was Paul Fogarty. He's not even running.
Yeah.
So it wasn't updated.
Yeah. All right. So anyway.
But look, that race was. You know, you have to give Dan McKee credit on that one.
Holding up against a $500,000.
A lot of money. Unlike Matt Brown, Aaron Regenberg did bring together all the progressive groups, most of the unions in Rhode Island. But what Dan McKee had going for him, Dan McGowan, who is our Providence reporter, was very impressed with the McKee campaign strength in Providence. Aaron Regenberg had Mayor Alorza's endorsement, and did Dan McKee win by a little or lose by a little in Providence?
Dan McKee lost by 800 votes only in
Providence.
Which
is great.
That's break even for all intents and
What
purposes.
coattails did the mayor have?
Right, and think about Johnston, North Providence, Pawtucket, and Central Falls.
I was just going to say, and Mayor Diosa, a rising star, he seemingly well liked in the progressive movement, stayed with Dan McKee.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Yep. So, and quickly on the speaker side, the speaker tried to throw his elbows around. Look at this tweet from Moira Walsh, a state representative on the Democratic side. I'm told that last two letters.
Yeah, I didn't know you were going to throw that up.
I didn't. Is that an FCC violation? I hope not. But let your
it's colorful.
Let your imagination do the walking. I wanted Fleming to tell us what that was, but he's there is an F for Fleming in there.
Well, I hope you're
but
confident
anyway,
as Fleming.
Yes, yeah. There you go. That's
Mr. Nesi's a lot younger.
That's your
new
thing.
Generation.
But she's kind of like bada bing, but right.
Well,
hey,
I mean,
to the speaker. This is going to be some
it's the old saying, when you go for the king, you better kill him. Moira Walsh, while not a king or a queen, is certainly someone who wasn't that afraid of Mattiello before, and now is the poster child for standing up to someone who's often called the most powerful. I mean, there were not a lot of votes there. The Speaker's chief of staff was seen in the district, and they couldn't pull that off. And other Mattiello-backed candidates in the state also lost.
I wonder if it bodes for whether he hangs on with Steve Fries. I wonder if his team is really as committed to the job as he would hope they would be.
Ken Block tweeted out just an interesting data point today I hadn't noticed, which is there was a 30% undervote in Mattiello's district for Mattiello, meaning 30% of the Democratic primary voters who pulled a ballot yesterday in Mattiello's district refused to fill in. He was unopposed, so they didn't have to. But
they didn't vote for him.
They decided, if Jack Reed's on the ballot, most of them probably do fill in. Oh, I like Jack Reed, and I'm sure they know who Mattiello is.
The progressives picked up a couple seats in the House. They broke even in the Senate, but in the House they've gained a few seats.
All right. I wish we had hours. We don't. But I'll have these guys back as much as I can. I think that is you on the tweet. That's not you.
That's not me. No, sorry.
I'll tell you when you're older.
I have a final thought. We didn't talk about Ted, Joe, and me, was the debates. It's disgraceful that Raimondo and Fung didn't do statewide debates. It's a horror show for democracy. The big money and the notoriety are uncontested when broadcast facilities don't demand their attendance. And it's still something that I think all the bosses need to think about. They're all worried, understandably, about affecting the race. Sometimes you got to think about how we're not affecting the race the right way. More to come on that. See you on the radio at 3 and tomorrow night here on that station. Good night.